Hello everybody, this is Tim, and this is going to be a video response to Same Old G, The Swamper, Brian Gregory, all kinds of bunch of people, Sean Connors, etc., that have done video responses talking about the role of the GM, or storyteller, or referee, what have you, and the role of the players, that area that's in between, etc., etc. Eric's UK put a video out talking more about the traditional role of the GM, and same old G is sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum with more of a sort of story game, indie game sort of mentality, but bringing that into traditional RPGs. I had done a video a long time ago talking about doing something similar, where you bring these sorts of ideas from story games and indie games and trying to put them in traditional games or like a traditional framework. Somebody you could describe it in different ways, conservative, liberal, whatever. I don't know. I kind of like traditional. When you say you're running games like people have been for a while, they get an idea, but I think there's some baggage there too. As the gentleman gamer said, old school gaming is very D&D like. When you say that, people just think of D&D. It doesn't really bring into account all these other sorts of games. So I like traditional. I think when you say that, people get a good idea what you mean, uh, unless they have different notions about what that stands for. So when I say traditional GMing or DMing, I'm thinking about a person that has most of the work, most of the prep work on their shoulders. They spend a lot of time working on things, and it differs from GM to GM what they work on. But when you are a player in a sort of traditional game, you tend to have a lot less work to do. You have, uh, you know, people when they think they just want to be a player, they just usually say something like, I don't have time to be a game master. I don't have the wish to. I don't think I could be that good at it. I think that's why we have so many videos about trying to help GMs, is because it is tough. You know, Even myself recently, I've been sort of questioned on the way I do things, and that's good because it makes me think. It helps me grow. It lets me experiment and try new things. When it comes to these sorts of where the players are and the game masters over here, players over here, where their narrative control is, their agency. There's all kinds of different terms out there you can use. I tend to fall in my preferred way. I fall into that traditional. The game master has more control. The controls in the hands of one person, and the players have less control. That's my preferred way of doing it. But I want to mention something here. When we're talking about these sorts of things, you don't just have to have one way of doing it. You could be like same old G for one campaign and go to a traditional mindset or framework in the next campaign. Or if you're running multiple campaigns at the same time, you can run them each in different ways. And honestly, I would recommend doing that just to try to see what it's like, what the benefits are, what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, what the flaws are, and just see how that goes for you. When we're talking about, players being able to narrate things and being able to create the setting as they go, and narrating what happens when the dice fail, or what happens when the dice succeed. Normally that's the results are in the game master's area. That's usually how things work. Most games are like that. Not all of them though. And I've mentioned the same old G. I think he's getting a little annoyed with me, but that sort of mentality is more in the story game, more collaborative, based on narrative type games that are coming out. And, some of them are a little popular, some of them aren't very popular. It's hard to tell sometimes what games are doing the best out there, especially when some of them are free. How do you control that? How do you monitor that? And do we really need to? I don't think we really do. But if you want to go down that route, that is a perfectly legitimate route. It just has different results, as Runeslinger pointed out, where if you're going to run, like, say, a published setting, and the game master has a certain idea of what that setting is. Like, let's say that I'm running an Empire of the Petal Throne Tekkamul game. I've spent probably hundreds of hours reading material, trying to absorb that, detailed and complex setting into my head. And I'm not even comfortable running it. Like, I feel like it deserves more. It deserves more of my time. Uh, you know, Sometimes I have to chisel this rock that's up here, chisel something in there so it sticks. So I need to go over things a bunch. And let's say that I sat down at a game that was more cooperative. Where normally in a traditional mindset I would describe actions or I would describe the setting. In a more collaborative, game, the players could, and they might narrate something that doesn't really fit the setting or doesn't really fit, the tone that I thought would be good for that setting or that campaign in particular. But that's also that traditional mindset where, okay, let's say I'm going to give another example here. I'm going to be running a New World of Darkness campaign set in the Wars setting, which is sci-fi, mixed with a little Star Wars flavor, but it's in our own universe. And the idea of the campaign is mine. I picked the setting. I invited people to play. I'm organizing it. I have done work on a forum listing all the things about the setting, character creation, etc. I've done all this work so far, and I still have a lot more to do before the players even really start to think about it. Like they're thinking about their characters right now, but I'm not asking them to memorize the setting, or I'm not asking them to read through everything. They have the materials, but I'm not putting that pressure on them. In that traditional mindset, part of the downside is, I'm doing all this work. If the campaign, like let's say it just craps out, it doesn't even happen. I've wasted all that time, and for nothing really, other than just learning the setting. But let's say that it does go in. It just shows that how much work I've done versus how much work the characters have done, and that could be considered a flaw of traditional gaming. That the burden is on more of the GM shoulders, and if the game sucks, especially like if let's say I'm running this game and I've run it for like 6 sessions, and I just get the feeling that no one is enjoying themselves, that it's just not going well. I don't put the blame on the characters or the player character's shoulders. I put it on my shoulders. So that burden of entertainment and good quality tends to be more on the GM shoulders, I think. And I've talked in the past about GM burnout, and this is also kind of a flaw of this sort of way of doing things. So from my standpoint, like this is the preferred way that I like to do it. Mainly, I think because I like to spend time working on things. I like to have something to do when I have downtime. And being a GM, if you have downtime, you have things to do. You have NPCs to create. You have the setting to either learn or create. If there's anything you want in the game, you can try to come up with that too. I don't really come up with plot per se. This is what Matthew Dawkins was talking a lot about. And when I think of plot, I think of railroad tracks, and that's not necessarily true. You can do it in different ways. You can have it where this is going to happen unless the characters intervene, something like that. You can have goals for NPCs and such. So I tend, even though I'm more of this old school, if you want to call it that, or traditional mindset, that doesn't mean that role playing doesn't exist in that format. I find that when there's less rules, role playing seems to come easier. But I've talked about that too in the past. So even though you can have like, see, it's almost like it's not like one side or the other. It's just various dials that you can spin up to 11 or turn down. Because you can have a very old school type of game. Let's say you're playing, Red Box D&D. You can have a lot of role playing in those sort of games. Sometimes there's less dice rolling because there's no skills, so you don't have a skill to roll. So I don't know. It's the Mother May I thing. When people mention that, it almost sounds like people are, looking down at a more traditional mindset. At least that's the way I was sort of taking it. They're trying to be fair and trying to put forth their opinion, so that's cool. But I definitely lean more towards that. I like that there is some consistency to the world. That there is a sort of, you know, as a GM, you have this referee type mentality of being trying to be neutral, trying to represent the physics of the setting that you're running. If a player is going for more of a cinematic thing, and the setting is more gritty, realistic, sort of based on reality kind of a setting, that's not going to mesh well. And you should talk about that before the game starts. But I find that having one person that's in control of keeping things consistent goes a long way. You can have one player that maybe you have five players, and four of them are playing in that realistic sort of mindset, and one's trying to be cinematic. And you kind of have to say, well, this guy just jumped off a building and he broke his legs. If you're going to jump off a building, more than likely you're going to break your legs. That's just it's based more on reality, trying to simulate reality in your setting. And if you're cooperating, it seems like the consistency of a game depends more on the GM in traditional games. In collaborative games, it's not so much power is in the hands of one person. So it seems to depend a lot more on who's around the table with these sort of collaborative games. One thing that I want to mention with this sort of idea of everyone participating equally or closer to being equal. When I was in high school, I had a lot of group projects. And I don't know why. Oh, let's see here. Let's stop this. I don't know why, but a lot of people in those groups back then didn't do their part. They just didn't. They were lazy. They were tired. They knew I got good grades or whatever. So they would slack off knowing that, I wouldn't let my grade suffer. So I did the work. I would try to motivate people to try to help me out usually. And, it wasn't always the case, but most of the time, that would be the case where I would do all the work and other people would just kind of like hang on and be leeches. It just seemed that that's how group things worked for me. So, and I think early on in my GMing career, or, hobby, whatever you want to call it, I had a lot of passive players. So I think that made me more of an active GM. Runeslinger talked about just having like a dead stare and not answering the player sometimes, not being that disembodied voice that's always there, letting them work through things, not giving them an easy out. And I tend to give them more of an easy out. I'll offer suggestions that they might not see. Probably because when I'm a player, if someone doesn't offer some sort of plausible solution, I can get frustrated. I just don't want the players to get frustrated. I just lost about 15 minutes of video there. Whoops. Man, that sucked. Uh, where was I? So I guess I'll change things up here a little bit. I've talked about traditional game mastering and how that tends to work. I think most of us have a pretty good idea of the different ways that game masters out there can run games. If there's a Pathfinder GM or a Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 DM or old school DM, they might have differences of how they do things. From table to table, people are going to be different. Every table is unique, which is kind of like a good thing and bad thing at times. I lean more toward that's a good thing. There's a certain culture of play around your table. Runeslinger talked about how he had a group that was mostly GMs, and they would all take turns, campaign to campaign. Sometimes GMs would help co-GM games, or you'd be a GM with other GMs in the same setting at times, And I've always wanted that. My problem is I've never really had that. So, uh, my experience, my journey, as it were, was a lot different. And I am a product of my experiences, I think. This is me sort of looking at myself, wondering if the way I do things is the best way to do it. And I'm kind of hard on myself. And, I've asked other people to be hard on me, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they aren't honest. But, I always look for feedback. I always want to try to improve. And I think I do. I think sometimes I go down the wrong path. I'm like, you know what? I probably shouldn't have done that. Maybe next campaign, I'm going to do something different. I think there's something to be said, too, about people that have been playing for a long time. They've had trial and error lead them to their current preferences. And I think some new people that are coming in, like Samuel G and others, have this vast array of all of this knowledge, all these tips, tricks, suggestions, different ways of doing things, and it's all at their fingertips. Where when I was, 10 years old, 8 years old, I just had, the books in front of me, my brother, and two neighborhood kids. Sometimes my sister would play. And we just flubbed our way through it. We made atrocious errors. We didn't listen to the rules half the time. We did the rules wrong half the time. Deus Machina, like all these, bad things that, people talk about. We did those things, no role playing, just rolling dice. I had a period of time when I did that too because, we didn't really know better. Um, but then there was other, we got on, we figured it out. We learned as we went along. And I think sometimes, even though someone can tell you a good way to do it, I think sometimes people just need to learn for themselves. They need to go through that. That's why I suggest trying different types of games, running games in different styles, and using different techniques. Experiment. I don't know how much I can say. Experiment. Try new things, tell your group, hey, this next campaign, I'm going to try these things. Are you guys okay with that? Okay, cool. If it sucks, we'll do something different. But, let's try this out, see how it goes. And if you have an experimental group, a group that's willing to try new things, that can be amazing. That can be awesome. Uh, Sadly, though, a lot of groups, from my experience, they pick a certain way or a certain game, and they're sort of locked in. Once the people learn a rule set and it's easy for them, they tend to stay in those ruts for good or ill, and that's what they're used to. That's what they like, and they don't try new things. So that's what people say. You might have been playing for 30 years, but you have a lot of experience in like that one line of tracks in the mud, and there's like a highway over there, and there's like a helicopter flying up there. There's different ways of doing things, so just try new things out. I have dabbled with these story games, and maybe I'll jump ship here and do something different for the rest of the video. I have played Dogs in the Vineyard, that even though it has sort of a GM role in that, the GM makes the town and things, a lot more of the narrative control is in the player's hands. It comes down to the dice, and they can figure out what's going on. There's a sort of different mentality there. I've played Polaris, which is a game for 4 players. There's no GM. The person sitting across from the table from you is like, they do all the resistance to your character. Anything that stops them or slows them down or is a challenge for them. Basically, the person across the table becomes your GM, but it rotates. And that was pretty cool. The only thing I noticed from that group is that the person that was across from me didn't ever have any GM experiences in traditional type games. And I felt, the people at the table said, oh, just go with it, man. Just do your thing. And I did. And when it was that person started to do the same for me, I could see it was hard for them. It was challenging. They didn't really know what was going on or what they were doing. So it kind of seemed like story games have evolved from traditional games, and you can definitely do them, but it always seemed like if you had GMing experience, you were better at that sort of thing. Like, it's almost like it's like advanced role playing or something, even though it doesn't really make a lot of sense if you think about it. But I don't know. Like, people can definitely be cooperative and creative right off the bat without any GMing experience, but sometimes that just isn't the case. I would wish, I think, to be in a group that I would be comfortable collaborating with 100%, just going with the flow. I think in a purely collaborative game, it would be best to have a setting that is vague, maybe a setting that doesn't exist yet. And as you play, as you collaborate, that setting grows. I think doing this in an established setting would be kind of difficult unless that established setting was vague in and of itself. One of the settings I'm thinking of right now is the setting about the Ven from Lord Strange on YouTube. Like John Wick is his name. That setting has some detailed stuff about the Ven, that culture, but the map isn't there. You have to make that up as you go. The dice mechanic is pretty cool in that game. I should talk about that. I haven't done a review of Houses of the Blooded, mainly because it's so far out of my comfort zone that I feel like I need to do more research. I need to read up on it. The dice mechanic is basically if the player succeeds in a dice roll, that player gets to narrate the results. If the player fails the dice roll, the GM gets to narrate the results. Now, notice one thing here. It's not failure or success. The player could narrate a success or a failure. It's up to them. The GM could narrate as success or failure. It's up to them. It's whatever they think is more in line with the story, whatever is more interesting, whatever is more tragic, because that's the kind of theme they're trying to go for in that game. And I am very intrigued by it. I would like to be in a group where I could see that happen. I think it can, especially with the YouTube RPG community. I think I would have to really just, make sure I have a lot of creative, cooperative, energetic people that would be in that group. I think it would work well. I would love to see that happen. I think for me, it's a difference of where the theory is of how it works and the reality. And maybe my, observations of the reality of these types of games is biased, is perhaps based a lot on who was there at the table at the time that I was playing, and maybe I should be more open-minded. I'll admit that sometimes I'm not. So, um, I don't know. So I can run a game in a traditional way with a lot more like Mother May I, and the GM is in more of control, the players, while doing their choices for their characters and so forth, don't have a lot of responsibility as far as the setting goes. Not don't have a ton of responsibility for how things succeed or fail. But these games are also very stable. They can run a long time. A lot of these traditional type campaigns go on for years, where story games and indie games tend to be more one-shots. They tend to be shorter campaigns. They tend to have a very specific setting written in their books, but you can't really branch out from that very easily. So there are definitely some strengths and weaknesses there. Um, I think at this point I'm probably just rambling on and on. I just make sure that when you guys are out there, defending one way or a different way, and so on and so forth, don't forget that you can do these multiple ways. I'll say one more thing, and I'll probably be done here. So I gave the example of conventions, and I think I was talking to Alex Gillette, the Captain Gothmog, the other day, where you could run a more immersive style game. You can run a more collaborative type of game, but you just have to make sure that you put that in the blurb for your convention game, just so people know what they're getting into. And it might be tough. I think you have to be flexible. And see, I think maybe this is where running games at conventions has also kind of flavored the way that I do things. You could have people show up at a convention game that have, maybe even very little interest in the setting. Maybe they just want to try the system, or maybe they're a girlfriend of a player and they show up and they have never role played before. So I think in that sort of atmosphere, it would help to have a traditional GM that can help players, can teach players, can lead them along if they need to, give them nudges, be more active. And I think that's probably affected the way that I run games. I want to talk about flexibility too. Just because you're in a traditional, mindset doesn't mean you can't be flexible. Doesn't mean you can't break the rules and morph into a more collaborative type environment for a little while. Some sort of hybrid. And I think probably where I'm at is some sort of hybrid traditional. Like, yes, I narrate success and failure, but sometimes I don't. Sometimes I open the door and let the players do that. And it really just comes down to what feels right at the moment. What, if it really doesn't matter what the results are, or it's a part of the setting that doesn't have a lot to do with what else is going on, it's okay. It's not going to mess anything up. I'll sometimes a player will ask me what's down the alleyway, and I'll just say, how about you describe what this alleyway looks like? Feel free to, describe it any way you want. And sometimes I've done this, and players kind of look at me with a blank stare, sort of deer in the headlights, and they don't even want to do that. So I guess that's that passive player thing that I mentioned before too. It's not that I haven't tried a lot of these things. It's just that when I have, the results aren't always that good. And I know that if I'm more in control, things tend to be better. But sometimes I suck, and then the game sucks, and then I feel bad. Like I talked about before. So I want I want to be more collaborative. I really do. I love the theory of not having to spend so much time working on things, perhaps. Even though like I said, I like to work on things, it also sort of burns me out sometimes doing all that prep work. So the theory of sitting down with a game with zero prep, being in a group with a bunch of collaborative people is something that I I wish I did more. I wish it worked out better more, and I wish those games would last longer. So yeah, I don't know. This has been a long ramble. I probably should just end it here. Thanks for listening if you made it this far. Feel free to leave any comments below if you have any suggestions or opinions, where you're at. Uh, like I said, you don't have to do it one way. At the convention I ran, like I said, I ran an Empire of the Petal Throne game, which was very political. The players directed the game the whole time, and I was more reactive. And then I ran a Labyrinth Lord old school dungeon crawl, where I was more of an active GM. And there was a lot of prep, there was a module involved. So, what the characters did had to kind of fit in with what the module was. So I ran like that. And then I ran a Wraith the Oblivion game, which was very immersive and emotional. And it too had a lot to do with what the characters did. It was more collaborative. So, I ran all these different types of games in the same convention. And I ran BRP Star Wars, which was kind of silly and off the wall, rules light. And, I don't know. It just, don't limit yourself. Try to challenge yourself. Try to do new things. And, I mean, if you find your preferred way, that's awesome. Uh, just, I guess I'm just warning you not to paint yourself into the corner so much, to become so inflexible that you can't play with a face-to-face group down the street because they're not probably going to play the way you do. I don't know. I'm all over the place. I think I'm just going to stop this here. All right, guys. I'll talk to you later.